Hello, hi. My name is Shiv Malik. I'm the head of growth at Streamer, and thank you so much for inviting me to the Northernlands Conference. And I'm going to be speaking about the future of data monetization. So I'm going to jump straight in. The data brokering and insights industry is broken, perhaps irreparably so. 4 points on this. Firstly, the lack of genuine consent from the people who create the data, that's ordinary people like you and me, means that brokers fail when exposed to public scrutiny. And I'll come to that in the next slide. Secondly, big tech is shutting down those avenues for backdoor data collection. For example, with the cookie economy, actually, and Google has just recently confirmed, or reaffirmed if you want, that they're not going to replace cookies with anything comparable, and they'll only be serving people up with the kind of high level insights, and going to do the whole psychographic thing, profiling thing with people, and it's a great way of selling advertising, not a great way to actually figuring out what people are actually doing for your specific business. Regulators are also tightening their grip all around the world. The EU has just released 3 new pieces of data legislation, some of which tackles this area very much so. I'll come to that as well in a bit. But there's also California, there's also India. All this stuff is happening all around the world, and it's not just privacy. It's all about, it's also about who controls and how many rights users have in order to take back control over their information and how it's used. And finally, because this collection of personal information is sort of almost always done in secrecy, right, under the table, those data products themselves remain a kind of black box, right? The quality is not, able to ascertain, where this information is coming from. And the data, therefore, is often untrusted and considered to be dirty. So, people are operating under the table and in the dark. And when they're forced into the light, they end up getting shut down. That's just crazy. I'll give you an example of that. Avast is an antiviral software company serving, hundreds of millions of people around the world. And what they were doing was selling the raw data streams, the kind of information, obviously, they have to know in order to provide you with effective antivirus software solutions. They were selling that to a subsidiary who was then monetizing that to the base of around 30 million to growing to 70 million a year. It was, and that subsidiary is called JumpShot. It was a commercial success, and in fact, providing the sort of deep analytics service that Google and others won't provide. Then Motherboard wrote about them, and Avast lost $500 million in share value overnight, and they closed the company down. It also took down another company called Hitwise, who were also dependent upon the JumpShot ecosystem. So all of this is driven by public attitudes and awareness, but these aren't, sustainable ways to run businesses, are they? And because those public attitudes won't change, the tide has basically turned. You're going to have to think about this in a completely different way. And yet it's still a seller's market, right? Big data buyers are out there, especially in consumer insights. They're desperately underserved because of, Silicon Valley siloing their own data and not wanting to sell the insights themselves. They'll only sell you access to advertising effectively. So, if you want to build a hotel and you want to make that choice between Kyoto or Seoul, or for example, I want to benchmark my company against the others in my industry, or understand the kind of more holistic consumer journey as people move from website to website. Well, where do I get all of this information from? I can't get it from Google. And the demand, obviously, for all this information is also increasing for these raw data streams of personal information because of the data-hungry AI industry. And really, we haven't even begun to realize all of the huge benefits and from innovation and social good value that could be realized when we have a far more open and honest analytics industry. And so right now, vast swathes of the organizations just don't want to touch this stuff, even though it could be adding huge value to their bottom line. Here's my obligatory Buckminster Fuller quote. I'm sure you've seen this before, but it is very pertinent. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And whoever cracks this for the data analytics and brokering industry will have a huge first mover advantage. So what's the solution? Actually, it's pretty simple. This is almost stupidly simple. Just ask people, right? Good old fashioned kind of respect. Just ask people. open and honest, in a genuine and open and honest sort of consensual way. That's the only way ultimately to build sustainable data brokering businesses. So just ask people to share their data in a really convenient way, the most convenient way possible. And then part two, directly reward them for it, right? So they've got a reason to do it in the first place, right? And that's so you're not just sort of collecting this stuff in a passive way. They know what they're getting involved in, and they're getting something for it. It doesn't have to be monetary. It can be social rewards as well. So share and reward, right? Really simple, really, really simple. But it's not easy to deliver from a technical standpoint. And it's actually a good reason to why these organizations haven't popped up in the past. Or if they have, there's in fact a whole graveyard of organizations who've tried this before, but it's technically very difficult to deliver. So Streamer has been building a framework for the last couple of years to support this sort of ecosystem of new businesses, which we call data unions. So what is a data union? Well, it's a framework that allows people to easily group and bundle and sell their real-time data to earn revenue. And crowd-selling like this has the potential to generate unique data sets of really high quality by incentivizing trade directly from the data producers, right? And actually, it's a model now that is supported by the EU in their new legislative framework called the Data Governance Act. They call them data cooperatives. There's data mutuals, data fiduciaries, data trusts. But from the member point of view, if you want, at this point in the game, they all look pretty much the same. I'm sure everyone at this conference will fight to the death for their own particular term and eschew the others, but there we go. This is all very early days. Let me just go give you a quick technical overview. The blue lines represent the data flowing from the members, if you want, to the data buyers via a sort of an application front end, which helps bundle and aggregate and format all the data and structure it properly, so its monetary value is properly realized. Goes to data marketplace, data buyers buy it there. The payment process goes through another a sort of stream, if you want, which is a public blockchain, which allows that scalability for micropayments, which you just can't get from the regular fiat banking industry. Again, another reason why these things haven't been built already. So what would they look like? Well, actually, we don't have to ask in an abstract sense. They're already being built. They already have members, and they're already on the verge of creating genuine monetary value. Let me give you one example. Unbanks, created by two guys out in Ireland. They created a PSD2 open banking company that can kind of, has the permission to read financial transaction data. Great. Banks already sell your financial transaction data. Horror of horrors, right? But if you can do this in a data union, then obviously ordinary people can benefit from that too, because it is their data, right? They're the ones doing the spending out there. So why not? Why shouldn't they be able to benefit from this? Well, if you can do it in a way that pseudonymizes and obscures people, then great. And that's what they're working on now. Another example, SWASH. SWASH, what is SWASH? It's a browser extension that operates on every major browser. It runs locally and collects that sort of surfing and platform data from all the kind of websites that you visit. Obviously, you have to download the browser and you have to consent to it. So it's a very positive consensual way of doing it, and rather than a kind of passive way that usually occurs today. Data is then aggregated and turned into a single raw data stream for people like data buyers to purchase. They've had a lot of organic growth, 20% per month, give or take, in the last couple of months. They now have 13,000 members of their data union. And they have built in a lot of privacy controls, obviously, and including ones which you can tailor to your own needs. So you're not sending data that you don't want to the data union. And this also lowers the regulatory hurdles on data buyers when it comes to GDPR consent, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, we've got the near future in which, we haven't really sorted out these problems. We had the first round in which, you visit a website, who owns your data? We don't know. It turns out it's the website, right? Well, is it going to be the same with cars, with washing machines, with fridges? You buy these things, but you don't own the information that flows from them. That's a crazy world. The EU looks set to ensure that you get to port your data from these devices that you own in the very near future. That's great. In which case, let's have a data union for cars, for washing machines, for white goods, from your Fitbit. Why not? In fact, why wouldn't you do it that way? Because you realize huge value. You can imagine already, you know, if you want to do diabetes research, well, great. Get people to permission their data from their Fitbits, and suddenly you've got a huge data set to draw information from. Isn't that wonderful? Much better than doing it the way we do it now, which is usually not at all, because it's so hard to get those permissions and consents otherwise, and the tools to be able to create those things. Finally, it's not just in the streamer ecosystem that people are building these organizations that share and reward you for your information. Tap My Data, GeoDB, Citizen Me, they're all out there doing the same kinds of things. GeoDB, for example, has 200,000 people in the kind of geolocation data space. Again, share and reward. So we believe that, you know, rich consent with built-in incentives are actually the only way to build sustainable data brokering businesses. Everything else will ultimately fail over the medium to long term, as evidenced on multiple occasions. Thank you very much for having me along. I am now going to join you to answer any questions that you may well have. Thank you so much. Really appreciated it.
Thanks, Shiv. That was amazing. And I've got some questions coming through in the chat, and I've got some questions too. But the first thing I'd like to ask you is just how much of a disruption do you think this is going to cause to the incumbent organizations, to people, and to the institutions that are going to have to deal with all this?
Yeah, I mean, sort of disruption always has a sort of a negative connotation, doesn't it? But for the data brokers, I mean, they've done it to themselves, haven't they? So they've completely disrupted and ruined their own industry by, I think, acting in this unconsensual fashion. So, you know, there's everything to exploit there and actually create better, more sustainable products. You know, when you talk to big enterprises, they're like, you know, we need these things to hang around. We need sustainable relationships. We can't just like wake up one day and realize, oh, that contract we signed is over because the company just went out of business because someone wrote an article about them. So it'll be good for that, very good for that. And then you'll start to see, I can't wait for the moment when we start to see more innovation. So coming from more open data, right? It's just what everyone's been advocating for a very long time. But I think until you sort of commercialize some of that process, and what that really means is add a bunch of professionals in there who are incentivized to do something with it, and you get the data in that consensual fashion, then you won't sort of see, you know, why do we only have one or two map applications? You know, we should live in a world where there's a choice of 40. But until you have that raw data at the bottom, which can be utilized by anyone, including map makers, let's say, map app makers, then you won't get that open innovation. So I expect disruption on both ends. It'll take a few years for sure.
Yeah, well, amen to more open innovation from us as well. So we've got another couple of questions coming in. So there are hundreds of extensions, but are there any that are doing quite what you're describing? That's a question that's come through from Gregory.
Yeah, there are. I mean, there is a huge ecosystem of browser extensions. And of course, a browser extension is only one way to deliver a kind of a data union, right? The question is, how do you read people's data in a way that isn't sporadic? So you've got to kind of find a single source for the data so you can structure it properly. And then have a device or some kind of application or piece of software that can read it. So a browser extension is useful in that regard. There are, yes, hundreds of these things out there, and some of them, they all monetize things in slightly different ways, perhaps, than the ones that do. Honey is a really famous example. So they give you kind of discounts and they read your information. And from what I understand, they also monetize that information too. Or they were considering that model, but they were bought out recently. But that isn't this, right? I think SWASH is quite unique in that regard, that they are a browser extension that just goes about monetizing that information for you and acting on your behalf, right?
Fantastic. And that's, for me, that's the most important thing, is a professional organization acting on your behalf, not trying to creepily follow you around the interwebs and then work out afterwards how to make money out of it, which is what we've got now in a lot of regards. There's a great question that's come from Herco Koemans from the Netherlands Ministry of Health. And this is really, I think this really cuts to one of the conversations that happened a lot about data unions is ethics. So the example of you gave around diabetes research and the financial incentive to provide access to your data, but then the ethical concerns about someone sharing their genomic data, which probably includes data about his future kids and their siblings and maybe their grandchildren. So how do data unions help with the data ethics of all of the health data issues that we have?
I mean, I think the two trickiest sort of data sets to monetize are usually the examples that people try and go in with, right? Yep. Which is genomics data. Don't do it, right? Probably not a sensible idea. And also Facebook data, because it's just made up of a morass. It's quite unique, Facebook, in that sense. It's not just you and the platform that have that relationship. It's you and everyone else in that network. It's actually quite difficult to monetize the data anyway, because it's not useful to anyone else except for Facebook, basically, it turns out, after a good number of conversations with data scientists. So there will be things that just won't be ethically suitable for this kind of model at all. And that's fine, because there's plenty of things that are very useful indeed. Like, I'm more interested in that stuff, like, the washing machine data, right? Because that's the stuff that it's like ethically, it's not, who cares about the privacy of your washing machine? Or maybe it's you as a person who's just sort of domesticated, he does 7 loads of washing a day. It doesn't matter so much, right? The private concerns are really minimal, but the value in that data is still huge. Right? For people like insurers, for people passing it back to the customers, for people, who just want convenience. You're like, I want to know when my washing machine is going to break down before it does, right? Yeah. So yes, there are obviously going to be massive difficulties. Don't try and tackle the hardest problems first with this model, because it won't work. And it probably won't work with genomic data forever. And that's fine, because there's plenty of stuff that does.
Fantastic. So Shiv, we come to the end of our chat, but I think what people should watch out for is the way in which GDPR in Europe are going to change things in the future. And if you can give us a couple of points. And then what happens in the UK? We're not quite sure, are we?
Yeah, I mean, Europe is really powered ahead. They seized last year's kind of, pandemic lockdown to kind of really consult with a whole group of people and put out some draft legislation, which is they all have wonderful acronyms and confusingly so. The DMA, Digital Markets Act, the Data Governance Act as well, the DGA, both of which, the DGA regulates these things called data cooperatives. It's going to be great because it ensures that you have these fiduciary duties. So people like organizations like SWASH really do by law have to have this obligation to their members. The DMA brings portability to real time, which is excellent. What should Britain do? Well, I think, it's clear that Britain's not just going to copy and paste European legislation. What would be the point of Brexit, right? From that perspective, what they should do is embrace, I think, what we could call digital free trade, right? To go further than Europe by far on the portability stuff. Ensure that people have a real-time right to portability of their data on everything, right? Just get ahead of the problem. We know that washing machines and fridges and cars and Alexa speakers, they're all, it's a huge ecosystem that's about to explode. Well, stop the problem before it starts, right? Who owns all of that data? Is it the consumer who, do I own the data from my fridge? Well, no, not on the moment, right? Can I control it? No, I can't. Well, there you go. Just solve this problem before it starts. Digital free.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks, Shiv. That was amazing, and you're always welcome at ODI Leeds. And
I love coming up and visiting you. You all.
Fantastic.
See you later.